So let's go ahead and talk about really the basis of what we will be talking about here today, which essentially is everything excluding insects. We're going to have an insects class next week. It's going to be great. But right now, I would like to talk a little bit less about the insects, more about some of the other wonderful animals that can be beneficial in your garden, at your property. If you have a large acreage of property, these are great ideas too. But let's just go ahead and jump right into it. I would like to talk about these critters, these animals that are good for your garden, essentially two sections. The first section is going to be wild animals, things that aren't domesticated, they're not pets. You essentially they're not invited in to your garden, to your home, to your area. They will just show up because they're either number one, they have incentives to go there, and we'll talk about those. Or number two, it's just part of their native habitat that you live around, and they've decided to make a home at your place. So let's start off with those wild animals, and I'm going to take even those into sections too. I would love to start with one of my favorite types of animals, which is amphibians. Of course, we're going to have our frogs, toads, whatnot too, and just a great way to start this off. In other parts of the world, I talk about a lot more amphibians, but frogs and toads are what we're going to really be discussing right now. So, generally, around here in the Front Range, I would say that you would more than likely find toads more than you would frogs. Of course, if you're looking at certain areas, that may be different. But these are types of amphibians that are very good at picking off some of the small animals, insects that are feeding on your plants, that are kind of taking down your crop. A lot of times this is most prevalent in vegetable crops or fruit, or small fruits, just because those are something that you eat and you don't want to decrease the yield on something like that. So let's start off with toads. Great amphibians, great animals that will do a great job in attacking a lot of these eating insects, even some slugs they like to feed on. They are, of course, like to lay out in some more of these kind of damp, darker areas where you wouldn't necessarily have the beating sun all day on them. And they have, of course, those really long tongues that will catch some of your fruit flies, regular flies, a couple mosquitoes, of course, your slugs, some of the snails, all these things that are going to be feeding on your vegetable crops. Frogs are very much the same way. They're eating some of those insects with their long tongues. They're doing a great job just kind of laying low. Often you won't see them in the daytime feeding because it'll be too hot. They, of course, don't want to lose as much water as possible. They like to hold on to that, being very hydrophilic. But in the nighttime, of course, they'll come out and they'll start feeding on some of these insects and slugs because, of course, what they're preying on and what they're a predator for. A lot of those insects will do a lot of their feeding at night, especially slugs and some of those mollusks. Great animals, and you can actually create good habitats for them, encourage them to come onto your property by having essentially a little bird bath, or even lower to the ground, small pond, or some kind of just water retention area where they can, number one, just be around water, have their home near, and not necessarily swim in, but just be present in a body of water, very shallow, small body of water. So if you were to, in your yard, create a little just kind of bowl-shaped hole, or if you wanted to core out an area, put some lining in there and get some water just on your property, that is very beneficial in encouraging and incentivizing some of these amphibians, frogs, toads to just kind of be around your property. And not only creating little ponds, but also planting a lot of crops that you, as the gardener, knows that some of these insects might attack. So having a food source for the insect that you're trying to control, which sounds kind of like I would say, more of a conundrum, but it's important. if you don't have the insect problem, you don't need the toads, but if you're growing something the insects like, of course it'd be nice to have those amphibians there. So shallow bodies of water, which are going to be good resting places for the amphibians. I'd like to talk now a little bit about reptiles. Around this part of the world, we don't see a whole lot of lizards. That'll be a little bit further south, but we do see snakes. The gardener snakes are a great example of a small snake that will do very well at also eating some of these, maybe less slugs because they will like to climb on the plants, but some of the smaller feeders, of course the eating insects, and grasshoppers, and even some of kind of the flies, beetles, whatnot, that may end up doing damage to your crops. But snakes, a lot of people aren't a huge fan. I don't blame them. They have some kind of Indiana Jones syndrome, and then that's totally fine. Especially with the smaller gardener snakes, they're a lot easier to keep around because they're not as frightening. Once you get into those larger bull snakes, then it becomes a little bit more concerning if you're someone who is afraid of snakes. Anyway, I would like to talk about just kind of where the snakes would live and a little bit more about what they'd eat. On top of a lot of slugs and insects that would be defoliating and destroying crops, rodents can also be a big issue. And they're not even an issue as much in some of your vegetable crops. They might be, but they like to rest under, let's say, if you have a low-growing juniper, a very shrubby juniper, a lot of times rodents, mice, some rats, they will like to nest and kind of eat away at the bark underneath those. If you ever see, again, a low-growing shrub juniper that has some foliage, kind of stems sporadically that are turned yellow or brown, I can guarantee you that's because there are rodents that have been eating away at the bark underneath the plant. And that is something they like to do, is they'll go underneath and they'll attack either the stems or the trunk if the foliage is covering the whole plant or the ground there, or they would like to attack the root zone sometimes too if it's a very fleshy, easy to eat plant. So having a snake around is actually not a bad idea for some of this stuff. And snakes really like the heat. Of course, they are cold-blooded, so they need to bask sometimes, like to prefer kind of more of these rocky, almost cement-like holes or areas, divots in buildings, or of course near your house too. But they would also survive well in sometimes in garden beds. They like to hang out in garden beds. That's where a lot of their food source is. Sometimes they like to hang out in warm parts of the grass when the sun is beating down on those parts. And of course, having those small gardener snakes are never a bad idea for some of your smaller insects. And then if you have a big problem with mice, rats, anything like that, having larger snakes is actually a terrific way of controlling a lot of that stuff. Now, I wouldn't want to invite a million snakes into my yard. That sounds terrible, but it would be kind of nice to have one. I mean, there are a couple snakes I've seen here at the nursery. I can guarantee you they are helping with some of these problems, some of the vole problems, some of the mice problems. It's kind of good to have them around. They take care of that. And it's not like they are outwardly trying to bite you if you step on them. If you scare them, that's something different. But they're not going after you. They're not going after you as a person thinking that you are their prey. They're really trying to go after those mice. So a little bit on reptiles there. And that is something, like I mentioned, and one more thing about that, encouraging them to come in. Of course, they like those warm, almost oven-like areas that are around rock, concrete, they can just bask in, stay warm. So if you have areas near your house, or even if you have kind of a native area in your landscape, they would like to hang around things like that. You might dig little holes, or not necessarily, but you know what I mean. Alrighty, next I would like to talk a little bit more about birds. Got amphibians and reptiles down, now it's time to talk about birds. One of the best forms of insect control, especially small insect control, and especially with some of our pretty crazy insect problems that we have. The first one that comes to mind, of course, is going to be grasshoppers. Grasshoppers are extremely proficient defoliators. They will attack vegetable crops, trees, shrubs, really anything that they can eat, they will eat. This has become so much of a problem, in fact, that every single year I get at least 10, 12 people coming to the nursery asking us, how am I going to get rid of these grasshoppers? They're just eating through everything. I can't spray anything on them. I can't even step on them enough. Some people take scissors out there. Cut the grasshoppers with scissors. Barbaric, I know, but sometimes you gotta. There are a couple ways to get rid of grasshoppers, of course, with chemicals or whatnot, but we're talking about birds right now. And birds love grasshoppers. They are a great source of protein for them, and the best part about them, different of course from birds from the rest of the things I've been talking about, is they're aerial. They can see everything from the sky. They can come swoop down and grab things that they see jumping around or eating. Snake can't do that. Toads can't do that. They are extremely important because they have quite literally the bird's eye view on everything. And of course, there are some very simple ways to keep birds around your property. And of course, having little bird houses, or maybe even pruning up or getting or knowing that you have certain trees in your landscape that are very sticky and there's no other really bad way to describe that, full of foliage, dense, that they can nest in. And that's a great way to get birds to your property. Again, there are different ways that birds can eat on some of these. They can swoop in, they can stand on a hideout, on a post. Having a bird bath is another great way to attract birds. Sitting in the bird bath, they get clean, they see insects over there, time to go get them. There are a bunch of different kinds of birds that control different things. Your smaller birds, sometimes even your crows, will attack some of those grasshoppers, smaller feeding insects, flies, even mosquitoes sometimes, and they get rid of the smaller problem. Then, if you have, like, let's say an excess bunny population that is chewing through everything, or, again, you have some of those rats or mice or voles, the larger, more predator birds like your hawks and your falcons and your owls, they will take care of a lot of that. And a lot of times, if you don't have like a small dog, they are great to have around. And if you provide enough prey for them, they will stick around. I mean, even again here at the nursery, we have a ton of falcons, owls, a couple of eagles that like to just hang around because they know that they're gonna have bunnies here. They're gonna have food, mice, voles, rats. These are all things that are very hard to control for us because, number one, we can't see them a lot of the time, but we also may not kind of know what their damage is like. And I'll use another example from here at the nursery. We have had in the past very, very large bunny populations, and they did a number to a lot of the plants that we had here. And of course, that started to go away over the past couple of years due to the introduction of some of these larger predatory birds, falcons, owls, whatnot. And a lot of times, just like with the smaller birds, having very dense trees, especially tall ones, are very helpful to keeping these guys around. They like to nest. I see a lot of falcon eagle nests up in these large cottonwoods that we have along the Front Range. Those are really good habitats for those kinds of animals. Even having large conifers would be helpful in creating some kind of shade cover for a lot of these animals. So, I mean, birds are great to have around. And I'm going to mention one more thing about birds here, is that they don't only eat insects they can see either, insects and animals. There are, for example, crows. If you have an excess of grubs in your lawn, if you notice that your lawn's slowly starting to die, but you see all these crows or just other kind of longer-beaked birds that are pecking away at your turf, that could mean that there's grubs underneath there, because the bird knows it's trying to eat, but it could also explain why your grasses suffered some dieback, because grubs will chew away on the turf roots, and some crows will actually be able to pick those out of the ground there. Of course, we're not going to get completely rid of your problem, but it is a good sign of figuring out what you may need to do. So a little bit about that. Next, I would like to talk about a little bit about mammals. Of course, these are going to be controlling a lot of the same things. Again, mice, rabbits, even some of the insects. Anyway, foxes. Foxes are great. If you live in more of an urban area, it would be hard to attract foxes, or heck, even coyotes for that matter. It'd be very difficult to attract those to your property, and many times you wouldn't want to if you live in an urban area. But at least in nature, or if you live kind of more in a suburb type setting, these would be really beneficial. Or even if you live near like a natural area, I bet there's some that would wander around in there too. But they're great at taking down some of those rabbits that might do an extra big defoliation of some of your plants. They could take down some of the mice and voles that would be chewing on some of your trees, shrubs, perennials, annuals, vegetables, all that stuff. And not only would they control these animals, but in doing so, they would make themselves present, which acts as a very strong deterrent for future visits of their prey and our issues. So there are real world applications of this too. I mentioned foxes and coyotes. You can actually purchase dried coyote, or mostly coyote urine. I bet there's probably fox urine out there. But these larger mammal predators, you can buy like powdered urine, sprinkle that in your lawn, and it essentially is that's the sign, that's the tell for all of these other smaller mammals to stay away. This is not good. There is obviously a coyote here, and I do not want to get eaten. So they'll go somewhere else. They'll go bite up your neighbor's stuff. Of course, the downside to purchasing these products or having or using something like that as a deterrent is that it doesn't last forever. You have to reapply consistently, which can sometimes be a hassle. And that's why I would always suggest, if you are applying a deterrent, you would want to have kind of a multi-step approach to getting rid of whatever it is. And that would, of course, include not only laying down a deterrent or something that smells bad to act as a deterrent, but also planting some perennials or shrubs that would give off certain volatile compounds, have certain scents, or even to the touch be very sharp or prickly, that would also act as a deterrent. So you have the mammal excrement, that urine powder, as a deterrent. You have certain plants that are keeping these animals away, and then of course, if you really have a problem, laying out traps, or you can of course spray organic chemicals if you need to get rid of some of these insects. Another great one, which of course we're still in the mammal category here, are bats. Bats are a very, very good predatory animal that is helpful around the garden. Not only do they pollinate, but they also have mosquitoes as one of their big preys. Bats love to eat mosquitoes, among other things, like snails and slugs and whatnot. Of course, they're going to be nocturnal. They'll come out at night. That's when they're going to be doing all this feeding. But eating mosquitoes, that's a win in my book. Eating slugs, that's a win in my book. I mean, they, of course, get a bad rap. And a lot of times they can be fairly frightening. You know, they can't see you, so they send out their echolocation. That's how they fly around. That's how they can see everything. And the way that they fly can be off-putting sometimes, but they do work very well in the garden to control certain organisms, pollinate your plants, and oftentimes protect them. And again, this is where having some of those small, shallow water pond areas, or having a nice big dense tree would be good housing for something like this. Of course, overarching areas that are shaded and quiet are another good way to encourage bats. But it's up to you whether you'd like to encourage bats at your defend some of the other animals that you have. Some mostly geese here, but ducks can through their excrement, which is very high in salts. So you want to make sure to be using less, but it still does have a lot of nutrition for the but yes, chickens, ducks, some of the domesticated goats are very, those are also terrific defenders of some wander on to your farm, to your property. But on top of this, properties like those chickens, like uh, you I mean people love dogs around here. Everybody's kind of dog, it seems like, and they can do. Dogs also do a lot of the same, kind of like those coyotes. Their excrement or them urinating around the lawn can send off some of those volatile smells, compounds that will tell some of the other, especially deer or rabbits. It tells those, hey, there's a guardian for this property. You cannot come in here, and if you do, I am the dog. I will eat you. So that is a big one. And this you can actually see a whole lot if you ever go to national parks, especially some out in the desert, these kind of southwest states. A couple of them will tell you not to bring your dogs on these walks because not only will they possibly destroy some of the low growing lichen or something like that, but them using the bathroom out there, of course, yes, using the bathroom out there or just being present, they are noticed. They are noticed by the native species out there. So that can actually deter larger animals from going to where the water source is. Again, this is a lot in those national parks. So that can work very similarly in your home. If you have a lot of rabbits, if you have a lot of deer, especially deer around here, sometimes having a domesticated dog or having a dog around, letting them go outside, surveying the property is great for deterring some of those larger mammals. So those are all just good animals, excluding insects, that would be great to have at your property. Again, went through the wild animals, the amphibians, the reptiles, the birds, some of the mammals. Of course, your amphibians, reptiles are eating more of those small feeding insects, beetles, flies, mosquitoes. Of course, larger snakes will eat some of the rodents. Your birds, you have your smaller birds, which are going after those grubs, or going after those feeding, biting insects. And then you have your larger predatory birds, which are going after larger prey, rabbits, more rodents. Then we talked about mammals. Have the foxes, the coyotes, which can help control some of the small mammals, as well as leaving behind excrement to use as deterrent in any given area, which would keep some of those mammals away for a short period of time. Of course, we talked about the bats too, and their love for mosquitoes, eating all those, and also working very well as a pollinator, which some birds do as well, which is why it's always good to have a couple birdhouses or large, dense trees that they can nest in, as well as having some of those small water ponds or just retention areas. And then we talked about our domesticated animals, the chickens, the ducks, the geese, even some of your larger farm animals or larger, I would just say domesticated animals to actually protect the other domesticated animals, which are doing great things. I think I would like to end this on talking a little bit about Not only can you use these natural things to, number one, incentivize these beneficial critters to living at your property, but they actually have inspired different products. For example, a lot of times you'll see products like this. This is a deer stopper, and the key to any chemical is looking at the ingredients. This is for any class, any chemical whatsoever. But specifically for this, you'll notice that a lot of these spray deterrents here are mostly going to be either one of two things: something that tastes very bad or something that smells very bad to these mostly mammals for these. So on here, we have whole egg white solids, cinnamon oil, and clove oil. Using these natural compounds, these natural substances, to lay down and create a bad stench for these animals, and sometimes us too. I mean, we're all mammals. To act as a short-term deterrent. And of course, the beneficial critters we talked about do this naturally, but that is a good example of something that is a product that you can purchase that, if you don't have any of these beneficial critters in there, can act as short-term deterrents throughout the season. I got another one over here too. Another one. This is more of a fogger here. And this one has a couple different ingredients, including rosemary oil, but has the same as the others. So a lot of your essential oils can act as deterrents as well. But that's not really what this class is about. This is talking about those beneficial animals. So I would like to open it up to questions here. If anybody had any questions about anything I did talk about, maybe about trying to, again, incentivize some of these animals to come in, any ways to do that, or just general questions about the animals, what they control, I'd be happy to answer any questions at this time. So feel free to type any in if you want, and then if not, I might be ending here in a couple minutes. So I'll give everybody a second if they have any questions. I'd like to add one more thing, actually, while I'm thinking about it, that I may have, of course, thank you too, that I may have skipped over when I was talking about them. I didn't touch on caterpillars a whole lot, but that is one of the insects I was talking about that is part of those feeding insects. So they would be picked off by some of the birds, they would be picked off by some of the snakes, they would be picked off, of course, we don't have a lot of lizards, but toads around here too. So that is a big one. I am glad that you have an appreciation for both snakes and bats. They're both really cool, and I'm going to like that message. Thank you very much. Alrighty, everybody. I really appreciate everybody for showing up today and listening. We have, again, classes every single week here through our kind of Fossil Creek virtual. I hope to see everybody again soon, and everybody have a great day.